In this lecture, we will discuss about the next important landmark judgment relating to Ramesh Thappar vs. State of Madras. It was also case of 1950 wherein particularly the very act enacted by the Madras government relating to Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949 was questioned, and the very section 9 subsection 1a was questioned, which relates to freedom of speech. So the case Ramesh Thappar versus State of Madras addresses the scope and limitations of freedom of speech and expression as provided under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Indian Constitution. The very introduction that we would like to discuss in this landmark judgment, that is Ramesh Thappar vs. State of Madras in 1950. The Indian judiciary confronted critical constitutional issues regarding freedom of speech and expression against the backdrop of governmental actions aimed at maintaining public order. As Ramesh Thappar was a prominent communist figure and found himself at odds with the Madras government imposition of restriction on his magazine, and that is the Crossroads, in which he particularly critically viewed the very foreign policy followed by the then government led by Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. So, in particularly, those imposition of restrictions by the government of Madras on his magazine Crossroads by invoking the provisions of Section 9, subsection 1a of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949. So this case unfolded against the broader canvas of India's democracy, underscoring the delicate balance between state interest in preserving order and individual liberty. So it was relating to, in particularly, freedom of press and as vis-a-vis Indian liberties, the individual liberties. So, it particularly relating as to freedom of press, the Supreme Court's deliberation on this case not only shaped the contours of fundamental rights jurisprudence but also delineated the boundaries within which governmental powers could operate in domestic society. So, in this regard, I would like to discuss the very facts, and in particularly the facts revolved around the magazine that was edited and published by Ramesh Thappar, is Crossroads, and it was in particularly taking critical review and opposing the very foreign policy followed by the then central government led by Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. So, the very issue relating to freedom of speech and individual liberty, the Madras government restricted the very entry and circulation of the magazine Crossroads. So the petitioner Ramesh Thappar, a notable communist figure, faced government imposed restrictions on his magazine Crossroads due to its critical stance on Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's foreign policy. The Madras government, invoking Section 9, subsection 1a of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act, 1949 banned the entry and circulation of the magazine, citing concerns about public safety and order. So, Thappar aggrieved by this action approached the Supreme Court, asserting that the ban infringed upon his fundamental right, and that is the right to free speech and expression as provided under Article 19, Clause 1 and Subclause A. This case marked a pivotal moment in Indian jurisprudence, highlighting the delicate balance between the state interest in maintaining order, peace, and security of the state and individual liberties, particularly regarding freedom of speech and expression. So, the very issues involved in this landmark judgment is relating to Section 9, subsection 1A of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949 and Article 13(1) relating to the very definition and scope of law, and Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A relating to freedom of speech and expression, and the very jurisdictions provided to the High Courts under Article 226 of the Constitution. So the first issue relates to whether the order under Section 9, subsection 1A of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949 violates Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Constitution, or falls within the restrictions of as provided under Article 19, Clause 2. And the second issue that raised was whether the provisions is void as under Article 13, Clause 1 of the Constitution for violating the fundamental right of free speech and expression, and whether it is a law as per the definitions and scope of law as provided under Article 13, Clause 1, and further the issue was whether the petitioner must exhaust remedies as provided under Article 226 of the Constitution as relating to the remedies provided by the High Court before approaching the Supreme Court. So now we would like to discuss the very arguments made by the petitioners and the respondent. So the arguments advanced by the petitioner was that the order issued by the governor of Madras banning the entry, publication and distribution of the magazine Crossroads violated the petitioner's fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression as provided under Article 19, Clause 1 and Subclause A of the Constitution. Further, Section 9, subsection 1A of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949 was agreed to be inconsistent with Article 13, Clause 1 of the Constitution, as it encroached upon the petitioner's fundamental rights, and the arguments from the respondent side was that the Advocate General of Madras government contended that the petitioner should have initially sought redress from the High Court of Madras as provided under Article 226 of the Constitution before approaching the Supreme Court as under Article 32 of the Constitution. Further, the argument made by the respondent as it was established procedural practices such as seeking relief from lower courts before approaching higher courts supported the contention that the petitioner should have first approached the High Court. Now we would like to discuss the very judgment delivered by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in its judgment on the very important landmark case Ramesh Thappar vs.State of Madras in 1950 clarified that approaching the High Court was not a prerequisite for seeking remedy in the Supreme Court regarding fundamental rights enforcement. Regarding the ban on Thappar's magazine, the court affirmed that freedom of speech and expression encompassed the freedom of propagation, essential for the circulation of ideas, while scrutinizing the validity of Section 9, subsection 1A of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949, the court examined its historical origins and invoked the doctrine of severability. Ultimately, the majority ruled Section 9(1)A void under Article 13, Clause 1 of the Constitution, finding it inconsistent with Part 3. However, Justice Fazal Ali dissented and arguing that the Act's restriction was reasonable for maintaining state security while ensuring peace and tranquility. Now we will make a critical analysis of the case. The Supreme Court grappled with crucial constitutional questions revolving around fundamental rights and governmental powers. So first of all, it deliberated on whether the petitioner had the prerogative to directly approach to the Supreme Court under Article 32 without first seeking relief from High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution. Further, the court discussed the significance of Article 32 as a fundamental right itself, as it is falling under Part 3 of the Constitution of India, which contains all the fundamental rights, providing a guaranteed remedy for enforcement of fundamental rights. It elucidated that both Article 32 and Article 226 remedies were analogous, granting the petitioner the liberty to choose either route without hierarchical precedence. As Supreme Court scrutinized the very validity of the government of Madras order under Section 9, subsection 1A of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949. So central to this issue was the balance between public safety and preservation of individual freedoms, particularly the freedom of speech and expression. So the court discussed the nuisance distinction between maintaining public order and safeguarding the security of the state. It emphasized that restrictions on fundamental rights such as freedom of speech and expression should be proportionate to the very severity of the threat posed to public safety or the state's security. At last, the court examined the constitutional validity of Section 9, subsection 1A under Article 13 Clause 1 of the Constitution, which provides the very definition and scope of what is law, which prohibits laws inconsistent with fundamental rights. Here the court emphasized the need for legislative restrictions on freedom of speech and expression to be delineated clearly, especially concerning offences against public order versus actions aimed at undermining the state. It underscored that restrictions must only apply to activities posing a genuine threat to national security or the government stability rather than mere criticism or dissent. Consequently, the apex court held that section 9 subsection 1a overstepped the permissible scope of restrictions as outlined in Article 19, Clause 2 and was therefore unconstitutional. Now we would like to conclude our discussion on this very important leading case, that is Ramesh Thappar vs. State of Madras in 1950. The very landmark case stands as a landmark judgment in Indian legal and constitutional history, affirming the primacy of fundamental rights, particularly freedom of speech and expression, in a democratic society. The apex court or the Supreme Court's judgment elucidated the very nuisance interplay between individual liberties and state interests, emphasizing the need for proportional restrictions on fundamental rights to safeguard public order and national security. By affirming the petitioner's right to directly approach the Supreme Court under Article 32 of Part 3 of the Constitution of India, which is itself a fundamental right, and declaring Section 9, subsection 1a of the Madras Maintenance of Public Order Act 1949 as unconstitutional, as provided under the provisions of Article 13, Clause 1 of the Fundamental Rights. The court underscored the judiciary's pivotal role in upholding the constitutional ethos of India. So this landmark judgment not only set a precedent for future interpretations of fundamental rights, but also served as a beacon of hope for the protection of democratic values in the Indian legal and constitutional landscape.